talk a little bit about the guiding strategy, some of the documents that have informed some of the opportunities we have in front of us. How do we get from strategy to implementation? Because a strategy doesn't of itself deliver anything. We have to turn that into a delivery mechanism. We're going to be talking also about local board engagement. What does it mean at the local level? What is it really about? How does the people connect with us? Run through some defining projects, and then there'll be a time for questions. So first of all, I want to introduce the panel. I'm Rick Walden from City Centre Integration. I'd like to introduce Shale Chambers. You know Shale? Shale, do you want to stand up? There we go. And Shale is chair of the Waitemata Local Board. We have Ludo Campbell-Reid with us, who'll be taking some of this presentation, and Stephen Rainbow as well. Thank you, Stephen. So look, Auckland is important. All cities are in competition, but the important thing here is we're not in competition with Christchurch or Wellington or the other cities of New Zealand. We're actually in competition globally. We're in competition with Singapore and Sydney. So there's an important role for Auckland in the wider stage, in the Pacific stage, in the global context. Cities create a productivity premium. So Auckland, for example, has a great concentration of professionals and the expertise, business people, the expertise you need to actually grow the wealth of a country. The productivity premium for Auckland City is 139%. That's 30 to 50% higher than other places. As we go forward, Auckland's going to be growing. You've seen a lot of this information before, but it just puts it a bit in context. There are more than 700,000 new people coming to Auckland over the next 25 years. That's going to be another 400,000 dwellings. In the city centre, there are going to be twice as many people as there were before living in the city centre, and that number has grown exponentially in the last 10 years, as you may well know. The number of students in the city centre are going to be up by 30%, and there's already 60,000 of them in the city centre. They define our space. And Auckland city centre is producing 25% of Auckland's GDP. So it will be by 2041. It's already represents more than the rest of the regional towns. So in response to the growth and the opportunities that there are, the chief executives of the council and the CCOs recognise that there's a unique development opportunity here. This is an environment we haven't seen in a long time. GDP at the highest levels we've seen in a very long time. And they could see that there was value in having a coordinated approach to the transformation of the city centre. So this is their initiative, the City Centre Integration Team. They established this group in January. We haven't been going long, but there's a fair amount on the agenda already. And importantly, CCI isn't another, City Centre Integration isn't another organisation. It's not another CCO. It's not another part of the organisation. It's actually an integration of the existing parts of the organisation. So our role in that is to create an integration role rather than being a separate entity. The purpose of the City Centre Integration Group is to provide leadership for the city centre and its development. It's to coordinate and prioritise council and CCO's initiatives and projects in the city centre, produce a comprehensive implementation plan that's going to deliver the vision and goals of the key strategy plans. You'll hear a bit more about those in a minute. Proactively engage with key stakeholders. That's an important part as the city grows. And accelerate implementation. Very important. So now I'm going to hand over to Ludo, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that have been guiding where we're going and how we deliver the city. So Ludo. And I just point out there's quite a fair bit of information in today's presentation, so I'm going to keep a tight leash on Ludo. He's not known for going over time, but hey, he could this time.
God, what a great intro there, thank you. Rick, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Kia ora, and what a great turnout, as Rick said. Look, Rick said a great sort of big picture around why we're here. Also set in motion a whole range of challenges that the city centre faces. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to meet those challenges together and how we have prepared a plan. As they say, if you don't have a plan, you'll end up somewhere else. And so we do need a plan to take us and to deal with those issues that Rick mentioned. So I'm talking about the city centre master plan, and this plan was produced, it was asked of us, Len and the councillors requested us to respond to the challenges that Rick mentioned. And a couple of key themes came out in that conversation. The master plan called, as I said, the CCMP, had about 95% public support for the plan, which is quite sort of unheralded in terms of the sort of public engagement with these sorts of conversations, and that's a really great start. The second point was really that some themes emerged which we found quite intriguing. The sense of being a competitive city, a globally competitive city centre was key, but also the sense of Auckland needing a heart, and everyone's always told me about Wellington has a heart and Auckland doesn't. Well, Auckland does have a heart, and it's a beating heart, and it's building, but it needs work and it needs intervention. The other part which people felt was missing was heritage, and a lot of people felt that the loss of heritage over the last 30, 40 years is something to be it's rather unfortunate. But this was a thing that people felt a huge sense of loss, and so how do we deal with these issues going forward? The other aspect, which was I think really important also, was the fact that there was some sense of loss of mojo. Now the word mojo is an odd thing, but I hear stories of councillors telling me about stories about when farmers had a rooftop, a playground on the roof for farmers, and there was a bird, I believe, called Hector, a parrot. And that's a cool city. People would come in on a Friday and promenade on a Friday evening with their parents and grandparents. And that's the sort of city that I think is a city that knows a lot about itself, and I think it's lost its way. So that was really one of our aspects here, and our aspirations was how to find Hector in many respects. What is the modern version of that? How do we find that sense of mojo? And I believe Auckland is going through a renaissance. It has found a mojo. And I would even say it's got a bit of swagger back. And I think these moments where we start to celebrate our city as a people, as a group, are very exciting. And this is the Rugby World Cup celebrations. What an extraordinary time. And we have to remember where we've come from as we go forward. And I would just want to point out that the city is changing before our eyes, and often people forget what it was like before. But streets in 2008, 2007 were unattractive, very soulless drop-off zones, are now beautiful shared spaces. On days like today, obviously, it's difficult, but obviously these places were not functioning that well. You can see the Elliott Street programme, people actually starting to fall back in love with their city, but not long ago it wasn't very good. And so as you move forward, Fort Lane and the pedestrian foot traffic, the city is changing in front of our eyes, but unless we remember where we came from and capture it in photographic, and monitor it, we forget, and quite quickly people expect the new thing. I mean, 4 Minute Mile was run at a time, people didn't believe it was possible, but it is, and then it moves on. And here we have Fort Street and the Fort Street precinct. The shared space programme has literally revived that part of the city. And we have seen extraordinary numbers, and in fact, 439% increase in hospitality spending in amongst that area. Now everybody wants a shared space. Now this is good because people want more. So it's important to remember where we've come from. An Auckland Art Gallery won the World Building of the Year last year in Singapore. The best building of the world in the world last year was our Auckland Art Gallery. The city is not renowned for its architecture. Well, it's starting to make an international mark. And here, I guess, is probably the poster card of the whole conversation, but the difficulties of delivering the Waterfront programme. The only good thing about this at the time was the sea link ferry to the islands and the fish and chip shop, plus the fish market. Well, here it is today. It's a very, very different place. Thousands of people go down there. And this was hard to get over the line, but people change, and Auckland is starting to rediscover their city. So look, as part of the new council, there was an opportunity to build a new plan for the city. And the key thing we did first was we drew a wider boundary. In the old days, I was told to keep out of the North Shore. It wasn't my area. But we brought the North Shore as part of Auckland. The city centre, and it also has a city fringe of historic villages, Ponsonby, Parnell, and Devonport. They're all part of the city fringe. And if you think about it from a transport point of view, the city centre is served by all these different pieces: walking, cycling, bus routes, rail, ferry, and gateways. There is a wider piece here. So we couldn't do that before the new Auckland Council was established. Some city centre attributes, and I guess I don't need to tell you about your own city, but there are some interesting points. It's fantastic natural setting. In effect, it's ridges and it's valleys. A wonderful waterfront with an active harbour, actually a working port. A characteristic topography as well, very unique, the manga and the cones. But also 400 heritage items sit within the city centre area. That's 20% of all of Auckland's heritage features, scheduled heritage features. So there's a real strong sense of heritage and character. But it's also highly accessible, but the current mode, as you can see here, is private vehicles. That's the dominating mode of transport into the city centre. 19 iwi as well, focus on the region. One of the key attributes or changes, and unfortunately you can't see the numbers here, but in 1991, only 1,900 people lived in the city centre, downtown city centre. So that sense of downtown has changed. In 2009, 24,000 people live there now. And in 2032, there'll be 45, 50,000 people. That's a doubling of the population. We also have a city, it's a university city in many respects, a city where the students are as important as the businesses, but also 90,000 daily workers. So these provide an opportunity. But as much as there are opportunities, there are constraints. And this was how the master plan saw it, was planning for growth was absolutely fundamental. It was actually quite poorly connected to its surrounding villages. It had a disconnected waterfront. We have Quay Street severing the city from the sea and the water, the Watamata. The transport network was under strain and how we move about the city. An incomplete pedestrian open space network, a great series of network of spaces, but they were in effect unconnected. Destinations, some great destinations in the central city, but how do you move from one to the other? A loss of heritage. Social infrastructure requirements were low. Environmental sustainability, what is our story around that? And the city centre's regional relevance, how relevant was it to the region? So Pukekohe, Helensville, all these parts of the region need to believe that the city centre is their city centre, their waterfront, not someone else's. So we couldn't do everything, so what do we absolutely need to do? And I'll gallop through. I've got about 5 more minutes, so it's not a long presentation. But I would encourage you to look at the city centre master plan. There was a proposal to create 8 transformational moves, and I'll start moving through those very quickly. The first one is the harbour edge, the concept of reconnecting our city to the water, the single most important opportunity in Auckland. And along this route, this idea was a series of beads of private development opportunities which were situated all the way along this bead, this necklace in effect. And so the idea was how to connect using the private sector to enable that change, uniting the city with the water. And I guess, working with Ngāti Whātua on Quay Park, master planning that, looking at Quay Street, I believe the city of Auckland is designed for rush hour traffic. You can see large swathes of the city dominated by traffic, but actually there's not actually that much traffic at different parts of the time of the day. So rush hour, it accommodates, but the rest of the time, it's redundant, and you could see tumbleweed blow across. So we're trying to think about how we can start to reconnect it. It's north-facing, it's on the waterfront, for crying out loud, and there should be cafes, bars, restaurants, people throbbing to the area. And so that is our vision, is light rail, perhaps all the way through to Mission Bay and Kohimarama, people rollerblading, people promenading, people falling back in love. I mean, I know these sound odd words, but loving your city is really important. And the cruise ships, that whole sense of integration. And Peter Cooper talked about turning our faces to the sun, and I love that idea. Here we have downtown car park. We own it. It's the best site in Auckland, but we provide the best view for the cars. Auckland has the highest ownership of cars per head of capita in the whole world. That's not to be proud of, and we have to alter that. We have to change a seismic change. So what can we do? But these buildings have major infrastructure which sit below them, which sit connected to them. And so we believe that these sort of old-fashioned infrastructure, sort of old-fashioned theories around traffic engineering and engineering are redundant these days. We'd like to remove this Hobson flyover, start to bring back the city to the people, redevelop our downtown car park, a living building rather than a car park. Still a car park perhaps, but a living, breathing building. And this building on the left, this shot's taken as you come out the tepid bath. We spent $17 million on that retrofit. It's beautiful, but I worry about my daughter's life when I come out the front door because someone's going to run us over. So it's about how we change this paradigm shift here. And there are opportunities. The east-west stitch is important too, linking the central city with the east. and the west. And so it's how the laneway circuit starts to spread. How do you interlink the New Zealand International Convention Centre? How do you break down these large dominating roads? And so here we have Hobson Street. Well, actually, fantastic aspect, north-facing down to the waterfront, but currently 6-lane motorways, which aren't that busy during the day, but are busy in the morning. So how about we start to widen pavements, have places for people to play? And interestingly enough, Hobson Street is the most highly dense street in the whole of New Zealand. 10,000 people live on or adjacent to Hobson Street, the most densely populated street in New Zealand. And you come out the front door, and that is what greets you. There is an opportunity to provide an amenity, enjoyment, and environment for our Aucklanders. And so some simple ideas around widening the pavements. Parts of the city where, there's a lot of white poles in Auckland. We need to get rid of these poles. We don't need so many, and they cost money as well. But what can we do to our central city? How do we revive it? By providing space for people. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. This is the concept. The next is the engine room, the idea that Auckland needs an engine room, a place where business, where commerce can flourish. And so this idea here is about how we use Queen Street Valley as the CBD. The city centre is the wider city centre. The CBD is down here. It's on the waterfront. And how do you link Queen Street, the grandmother of Auckland, how do you link the Golden Mile back into that piece? So it's very, very important how you think about retail. Retail is a key driver here, so that's what the driver for the engine room has been. And here we have Queen Street. Post-2007, when we did the upgrade of Queen Street, we had 33% more pedestrians walking up and down Queen Street. Fundamentally important. Topshop are coming back. We're talking to Zara. People are starting to believe in... it's coming, Someone said to me once, Ludo, you don't come to Auckland for the shopping. Well, you should as well. It's got an amazing natural environment, but it also needs to be a place where tourists and visitors and our people can come and spend time. And this is our vision for Queen Street. This was the #1 most favoured project from the public. Pedestrianise Queen Street, not just shared space it, pedestrianise it after the CRL. So the idea is light rail up the middle of Queen Street, linking right up to up to Quay Road and making the Quay Road feel part of the city centre. And this is the vision, highly supported by the public and what we want to do. Sitting adjacent to Queen Street are a series of little laneways, and I think they're the best laneways in the world. We all get misty-eyed about Wellington, we get misty about Melbourne. We have them here, but I don't want to shop there. I can't walk up and down the street with my daughter in a pram because there's no space. So what we like to do is provide space for people to recreate and to celebrate their city and shop, but also provide space for cars. It's not an anti-car policy, it's a pro-people. The next one is really around the economic strategy. Just 3 words, 3 numbers, 652, 6% growth in exports, 5% growth in GDP, 2% growth in productivity. This city will need to change its economic strategy. The old ways are not good enough, and so the new the inspiration is now innovation, high-tech, sell our ideas, sell our brains to the world. Don't sell heavy, low-grade products. And this idea of the CBD, the city centre, being the innovation cradle. There's a lot of nurturing words here and quite human words, but it's the Grid Auckland programme that AT and Waterfront Auckland are working on with the economic development team. It's the universities, it's the medical centres, the medical hubs. This is about learning cradle, and that's that role of New Zealand. It plays its part in the Asia-Pacific region, this idea of the leading innovation hub for the Asia-Pacific region, which Rick talked about earlier. And it's how the businesses and the students, the future residents, take the city, how you work together, how you nurture them, the academia, the staff. And there's a real opportunity. You can see all these different parts, the innovation cradle, which we've talked about here, linking them all together. Last few. I won't dwell on this in too much depth, but the city rail link is not the city centre rail link. It's a rail link for the entire region. It'll double the patronage, it'll double the productivity of the entire network. The whole network is predicated on a single cul-de-sac. Open that up and the whole region benefits, and therefore the country benefits too. And we've worked up a whole series of programs how to redevelop the land above the stations to build a transit-oriented city where people will start to choose to live and work in the city centre. This will be the economic unlocking of Auckland. And there's a whole series of work. We've been working with Auckland Transport for some time now around this. And some development studies around what might happen here in this area with a new station on Aotea Square. Suddenly, How about this place as a living, working destination, not just for the council? So we have a whole series of innovation opportunities and development opportunities here. And we've done a whole lot of work up in Newton and so forth. The last slide or two before I finish, Rick, how am I doing for time? One more minute? One more minute? Okay. Right, it's this idea of our green and blue parks. We have some of the most extraordinary parkland in Auckland, but we also have a blue park, the Watamata. And how do we link all these pieces together? How does Auckland show itself off? How do these parks be part of that? The idea was the green link, linking these great parks into some sort of network of systems. And what was intriguing here for us is that the domain, in effect, is very severed from the city centre. It's very hard to move between these parks, and so it's the green and blue parks. So the concept has really been to think about roads like Victoria Street, unattractive, not a great place to shop or work or promenade or to fall in love or to meet your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your family. And people don't even cross where they're meant to cross. People don't like to be told what to do. They just like to do what they feel like doing. So our plan is to link Albert Park, this wonderful Waharoa, through to Victoria Park and down to the waterfront. This is the plan for Victoria Park, greening the city, transforming tarmac into green space, places for people to recreate and to enjoy their city. There's still space for cars, but just not so many. And we need to start to wean ourselves off that. So it's about changing our future. And the last one is the city to the villages. I talked about that earlier, about historic parts of the city. How you link these pieces to make sure that they all work in unison, in concert. And we have bridges. Bridges are meant to be celebrations, not just purely a functional need. They're places where you get great views and vistas. Ours are awful, but they could be beautiful. They could be beautiful, not with a lot of money, but with a little bit of effort and greening, lighting, places for cycling, and reconnecting our city. And here's a really cheap idea. An old disused part of our Auckland's motorway network, the Nelson Street off-ramp. That's the proposal, could be, for an artwork, but a new cycle path linking around the city centre. New York has a High Line, but so do we. But how about we start to green it and we start to build? They're redundant pieces of infrastructure that could be brought back to life, and that's the secret. It's not about building new stuff, it's actually about making best of the old stuff. And here's the domain. This would be a big project to take on, but this is a lot of land. Again, disused. You can't walk as a pedestrian from the domain to the city. How about we raft over the motorway, build development opportunities for the university, for private sector? How about we have 24-hour football courts, tennis courts, a city of play and so forth. So there's the city in a quick nutshell. I'm just about to introduce Stephen Rainbow, who's the general manager at Waterfront Auckland, to take us through the water city, and I look forward to that. Thank you.
Ludo is always a hard act to follow. I just wish he'd removed the box that he was standing on. So I literally have half a dozen slides here, and I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about the waterfront, but the critical thing about central city integration is that it's about collaboration. As Rick said earlier and is about to say some more about. So it's actually about different parts of the council working together because this part of the city is so critical. So I'm just going to touch on a few of the learnings from Waterfront Auckland and what's been achieved there by the remarkable small but perfectly formed team who run that part of the council family, because really what has been achieved there has met with enormous public success and has been warmly welcomed by many parts of the region. So I'll run through those, and I guess the first thing therefore that it's important to say, because we are talking about developing a downtown framework which will pull together all of these various strategic planning exercises into a document which will guide future development across the central city. So this fulfills the critical first function, which is having a vision. And the waterfront plan from 2012, endorsed by the council in that year, is the waterfront vision. It was subject to a great deal of public consultation, a great deal of public buy-in, and represents clearly the vision for the waterfront. So anyone who wants to know what's happening can look at that and see the future of the waterfront. So downtown, we need a vision. Then we need some principles to inform the decisions and the choices and the balancing of the different priorities that will need to be made as we progress the development of the downtown. Because the fact is, if you look at Quay Street, for example, there are a number of different requirements there. Transport, obviously very important in terms of Quay Street. But then there are the broader urban design objectives, and of course we always have to balance up the economic and business objectives as well. So in terms of those principles and the waterfront, we start with the blue-green waterfront, which is essentially recognising the natural environment and the ecological values there that need to be preserved in everything that we do. We then have the critical principle of the public waterfront. Waterfront Auckland's key mission really is to give Aucklanders back the waterfront and access to the water that they have been denied for so long. And that's a critical principle, and it will underpin whatever evolves in terms of the downtown framework, in terms of giving people access back to that waterfront, as Ludo has just outlined. A working waterfront. Actually, there are a great number of jobs and a significant economic contribution from particularly the fishing industry, but also the cruise ship industry, from the super yacht industry that contribute greatly to the Auckland economy, and we need to preserve that contribution and ensure that it's sustained as we do new development on the waterfront. A connected waterfront, the transport issues, the ease of accessibility and connectivity through to the back into the CBD and throughout the city. And it has to be a livable waterfront, i.e. people will be living there in increasing numbers going forward. So there we've got the vision, and here we've got the principles that then determine the decisions that are made within that vision about particular developments and proposals. Underpinning all of that is the Sustainable Development Framework. And again, if we go back to the broader council family, what is being done on the waterfront is a living, working example of what sustainability means in an applied context. So not some abstract discussion about sustainability and how nice it would be, but actually what it means when you apply it to development principles. So, for example, if you look at Bledisloe Street, which some of you may have had the pleasure of walking along, it's a new part of city infrastructure, it's a new street, it is surrounded by rain gardens so that they take the runoff from the road and they filter out any of the toxins, etc., before that water runs back into the harbour. Now, it's a small example, but it is a real example of what sustainability means when it's actually applied in the real world. And incidentally, we're working with Ngāti Whātua, not just on the plantings in Bledisloe Street, but also on the maintenance of those plantings so that there's actually an ongoing business opportunity there for one of the most critical iwi that we have a relationship with. So the Sustainable Development Framework also has principles, and again I put this up as an example of central city integration because as the downtown framework and the central city evolves, we have working examples and illustrations of the kind of principles that will underpin what we can do throughout the entire downtown. I'm not sure if those words are clear to you on those screens, but anyway, here's the 5 key strategies. High-performance green buildings, renewable energy sources, sustainable transport, exemplar projects, for example, a living building potentially, such as the Tūhoe headquarters, which has recently been built, and adaptation to change, a reference clearly to climate change and rising sea levels, for example. So this is grunty, real, and being applied with the new developments that are happening on the waterfront. Now, Ludo already put these slides up, but it is worth just reminding you that it was literally, as Ludo said, we need to remember that it was only a few years ago that we did not have access to the waterfront in this city, by and large. So on the left is 2010. In fact, the one on the right is not as today because the ASB building's not there. But it is very important to remember it was literally only a couple of years ago that this was opened up to the waterfront. To the people, this part of the waterfront was opened up to the people of Auckland, and it has been, by and large, a resounding success. And why? Because some of those principles have been applied here in a very real way. So, for example, we've got a children's playground here, which, for those of you who are familiar with it, is enormously popular. And incidentally, and not unimportantly, attracts an extremely diverse crowd. Not unusual to see the basketball court alongside Pacific Islanders playing alongside Maori, playing alongside young Asian people. We attract a very diverse crowd down to the waterfront with the offerings that we have there. And it's not unimportant to say that while the promenade here is attractive in terms of an experience and access to the restaurants that have been a great success here, but also because actually you can go down to the waterfront and wander along here with your friends from out of town and not spend any money. And this is very important. This is an attractive place to promenade. or as Ludo would have it, meeting your girlfriends and boyfriends. It's also a place you can really just go and have a pleasant experience in watching people without spending any money. There's an artwork down there. We made conscious decisions about the scale of the buildings on North Wharf. We could have gone to 3 stories at least. In fact, we chose to go with low-scale buildings that reflected the marine environment and created an attractive architectural and design offering. And again, as we go forward with the downtown, mediocrity, frankly, has probably defined most of the architecture in this city over recent times, and it's important that we know that we can actually move beyond that and see some really stunning examples of architecture, and some of those are on the waterfront, and we want to see more of them in the downtown as that part of the city develops. This is based on a model which is important because here again we get back to economics and finances. This is based on a model of creating quality infrastructure with ratepayer money up front to create an attractive environment in which the private sector will want to invest. And it doesn't matter about the specific figures, but what you can see there is that having made that investment on behalf of the ratepayers, we are attracting a great deal of private investment into the waterfront. Here's one example of what you're going to see in the very near future. This is the precinct plans for the commercial space, which is around 50,000 square metres, which includes the innovation precinct. In addition to this, in the Wynyard Quarter, you're going to have around 600 to 800 residential apartments being developed by some of New Zealand's top architects, and a 5-star hotel being built by Fuwa, and that's going to be a great asset for the city going forward in terms, again, of that economic contribution. So there's the vision, there's the principles, and these are how they are applied. And I think if we can apply this kind of model to the downtown, this is going to be a city which is going to go very rapidly from being a gangly teenager to a very attractive young person. And that's the stage that we're at in the city now, and it's a great privilege to be a part of it. Rick, over to you.
Well, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Ludo. So this is about a journey I mentioned earlier on. We've talked about a couple of the strategies that are guiding the way we can develop our city. Auckland Transport, of course, have their guiding strategies as well, as does AT and other parts of the council family. But that's another conversation for another time. When we look at what we want to be doing in the city centre, we realise that we have to be very careful about how we invest the funds that we've got. We don't have a lot, but we've got to make what we've got count. What we've realised is that we need to focus that energy into precincts. Now, we've talked a little bit about the Wynyard precinct. Stephen gave us a bit of an insight into what's been going on and what might be coming up, some of the principles around that. We've identified five precincts. You see them there: downtown, the Learning Quarter, the Aotea precinct, and the Victoria precinct, which is where the International Convention Centre is going to be going in the future. Not very far distant future, I might say. So how do we get from the visions to where we want to be, which is an implementation plan? Now, we realised that the strategies are guiding us and that we need to focus our energy into various precincts. And that's the way in which we need to be able to take forward into an implementation program. So this is a bit of an idea of what's going on in the city over the next decade. There are 50 dots up there. You can count them if you like. These are projects of some significance. There's lots of other things going on, lots of other business as usual, but these are significant projects. There's one heck of a lot. And the challenge is going to be, how do we know where to go first, what to do first? How do they interrelate? So we put a bit of a diagram together to see how some of these things fit together. The interdependence. If you do this, can you do that? When you do this, how long before you need to do that? And that's just one corner of a very, very, very big diagram. And the intention is to show you that it's complicated because it is complicated. So we need to have some thought as to how we can realistically and practically chart our way through the decisions we need to be making to progress the city. We've identified that the best way that we can do this to help the councillors and the boards make their decisions as to where they need to go is to look at the strategies consider projects. We've got 50 of them there we've just identified. The way we can get from one to the other is to create this framework, an understanding of how projects sit one within another, how they sit beside each other, how the timing works, and identifying the things that we need to do, the steps we need to take, and the decisions we need to be making to enable these projects to occur. It's the first step in delivering the project. It's the implementation plan. And we've started to put this together now for the downtown, what we're calling the downtown framework, precinct framework, and we can talk a little bit about how we can take that, what that means in terms of projects. I'm not going to go through all the detail in this slide here, but there's a purpose for this document. It's as I explained it to you. It's a non-statutory document, but it is a set of information that enables councillors to understand the implications and benefits of various projects. Ludo, for example, mentioned a number of the stitches within the city centre master plan, and bringing through the downtown frame calls on a number of those, and the other frameworks will call on other stitches as well. Give you just a little bit of a glimpse about what's happening in the downtown framework, the downtown space, some of those big projects that are sitting in there. City Rail Link, of course, the biggest project the city's seen for a very long time, a very defining project. It's a long build, but it's a very disruptive build as well. For example, it will take out Lower Queen Street while it's being constructed. It takes out the corner of Albert Street and Custom Street while it's being constructed. Significant impacts coming from a project of that scale, and there'll be other projects moving through the city as that project progresses. So we need to hold in our mind that project when we start to think of some of the other projects that might sit around it. Buses are our heavy lifters in the city. We're moving to a city rail loop, and we're improving the rail system, but always buses are going to be our heavy lifters. They carry by far the majority of the passenger transport load in the city. There are more and more buses to meet that need. Even with the CRL, there will be more and more buses. And we're struggling to get those buses onto the roads because there just isn't enough room for them all. The frequency of the buses and the size of the buses is increasing. You might notice we've moved to double-decker buses because we just can't physically fit them all in there. So we need to think about how we manage that. In the downtown area, Lower Queen Street has been the place where the buses meet and have fun. And we're not sure that that's the best outcome for the city, particularly if you're looking to create the people link from the city to the water. And Ludo talked a lot about that, as did Stephen. So we've got some ideas about how that might work, and there are a number of options. And this framework will set out some of those options so the councillors can see what they might look like, what the implications are of doing one thing versus something else, and how that fits, for example, with the CRL. If you're digging up Lower Queen Street, is this the time when you might want to consider how you're going to manage your buses? And by the way, what it does do if you move the buses off Lower Queen Street is give you some opportunities as to what you may be able to do with that private open space and some of those connectability things. And there's a couple of examples of what that could look like going forward. Is this the time to do it when you're digging up the ground for CRL? The interdependence of these projects and the timing just needs to be understood. When you look at them in isolation, it's not always clear that these things have that connection. Some more images of that. Whoops, I flipped past that. Oh. One of the projects that's in front of us, not a very visible one, is the seawall. So the seawall from Prince's Wharf right the way along to Marsden Wharf isn't in a very good condition. If we had a moderate earthquake, there's a fair chance that there could be a failure of that wall, which might impact on infrastructure and could even impact on life. So we are having to undertake a piece of work to replace that seawall. That work's going to start next year. There's some enabling works happening right now. So next year, we're doing some seawall work. We also want to undertake an upgrade of Quay Street. The Mayor and councillors see this as one of the best opportunities in the city to create that transformation, that joining of the city to the water. Clearly, if you're replacing the seawall, that gives you reason to think about what you might or might not be able to do with the reconstruction or redevelopment of Quay Street. which of course is impacted on by the buses in Lower Queen Street, which is dependent on the city rail link. You're starting to get a picture of where I'm going with all this dependence. And here's an image of what Quay Street could look like, for example, if we were able to reduce the impact of vehicles on that street. There'll always be cars there, but we want to be able to manage what those numbers might look like. Moving just a little bit further out into the sea, the water space is a big challenge. We've got a lot of competing demands in our water space. The cruise industry, for example, is exploding. The number of vessels that we've seen coming into the harbour in the increase in the last 10 years has been exponential and will continue to be that way. There'll be more people, larger vessels coming more often. We're putting them in the same space where we've got our ferries. And we're going to double the number of people using ferries over the next 10 years. We're not going to double them, people double themselves. We're going to have more ferries, we're going to have longer ferries, and the ferries are going to be going more frequently. There's competition in that water space. We've got some projects underway at the moment, some optioneering around what that might look like going forward. There's a couple of examples just flashing up in front of you there right now. The cruise, I mentioned cruise, that's going to be a big challenge to us. We may have 3 large vessels in the harbour at any one time, and that's going to be a challenge as to where we put them and all the other infrastructure as well. So we're making progress on some of these things. Quay Street's going to be starting work next year. City Rail Link starting next year. The seawall upgrade has already started, but the big part starts next year. The bus infrastructure, we've got a new passenger transport network plan coming on board in 2016. We're going to do something next year. Downtown shopping site, I didn't even talk about that, the shopping centre. The precinct properties development, they have a development that they want to get underway 2016. There's an awful lot happening all at the very same time. We've got a lot of opportunities in front of us. I'm going to flick through these really quickly. This is looking at some things that people do overseas that are quite well. San Francisco looks just like our waterfront. They had an earthquake and their motorway fell down. They replaced it with a plaza and nobody noticed, except the people who like plazas. Cars went somewhere else. It actually works. It can be done. I'm going to flick through these. This is an interesting one. This is a scene of a beach, a wonderful beach in Europe. Actually, surprisingly, this is a beach on the edge of the Seine River in Paris. And somebody had the great idea to take a couple of lanes out and put some sand there, and people flocked to it. People want to see these things. We're going to do those things. Here's what Quay Street could look like going forward. And I'm just going to flick through these because I want to give Shale a bit of time to be able to talk about some of the things. So, Shale, I'm going to hand over to you now, and this is really about how do we make all this happen at the local level as well? And Shale's going to tell us all about that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Shale Chambers, the Chair of the Waitemata Local Board of Auckland Council. Have the privilege of representing the 29,000 people of the historic inner city communities of Auckland and 30% of the business rating base of Greater Auckland. And represent an area larger in size than the original Auckland city to the beginning of the First World War, only 100 years ago yesterday. We've come a long way. So in terms of the role of local boards, just very briefly, you know, we're a decision maker on things local libraries, local parks, and community halls and facilities, and many of those are in the city centre as well. We're an advocate. Basically, local boards act as influencers, facilitators and partners in the decision making of others within the Auckland family. And we're place shapers. You know, we have a key role in developing relationships with communities, community organisations and businesses. So there are many exciting projects and developments happening across the city centre and that are moving us towards becoming the world's most livable city. One of them is of our objectives is connected, accessible and safe transport choices, just one of our 6 outcomes. So Waitemata is leading the way in supporting cycling and walking for leisure, commuting and just moving people around neighbourhoods. We are working with Auckland Transport, City Transformation and Parks to create a network of safe and pleasant journeys that connect parks, plazas and suburbs so that people can move around easier and safer. And some of the projects you will have already counted around the city include the 2 shared spaces, Federal Street and O'Connell Street, nearly complete, and the plaza redevelopment of Upper Khartoum Place, all scheduled for completion next month. And we also, this construction has begun, obviously, of the Beach Road Cycleway and the new wide Waterfront Boardwalk and the Grafton Gully Cycleway. So lots is happening in this space. In recent years, the city centre became a thriving residential centre, enabled and encouraged by the redevelopment of high-density housing and a boom in overseas students. We've seen the city centre population grow by nearly 47% since 2006 to over 26,000 residents. The city centre is far from being just a CBD these days. The change, in many ways, living is creating strong demand for parks, open spaces and community facilities, basically the people-oriented things of our city centre. And Myers Park has been recognised for its historical significance and a green lung and important for a place for local residents and children. It remains a hidden gem. So construction is currently underway for the development of a new playground, improved lighting, CCTV cameras and Queen Street and Point Terrace entranceways. Under the future implementation of the park development, we'll also see better connection with Aotea Square, and we'll set Myers Park up to serve our growing and changing city centre community for the next 100 years. Knowing that our inner city population was growing and that the resident population includes a significant number of migrants as well as young people, we felt needed to better understand the community facility needs of this urban group. In 2013, we commissioned a study to look at the best way to redevelop the Pioneer Women's and Ella Melville Hall, the only community centre potential in the city centre. We work with City Transformation and Community Development and the Arts team to create an active community hub which is welcoming and well-maintained modern facility. We will have up-to-date technology and lots of activities happening at affordable prices, and we will be connected to the redeveloped Freiburg Square, which is also being developed in tandem with one design team, and this will be completed by the end of next year. Did I go one too far? Yes, I did. Partnerships and collaboration. During working hours, the city centre has a population equivalent to the 4th largest city in New Zealand. This means that there are a number of stakeholders who are interested in what's happening, and that's probably the understatement. The input of the governing body, Waitemata Local Board and other CCO boards and groups have an interest, as well as many stakeholders, including the City Centre Advisory Board, businesses, university and residents all need to be coordinated. And that's what we've been talking about today. We are frequently dealing with the interconnectedness of projects that have a number of interdependencies with each other, which can create huge amounts of complexity. Partnerships and collaboration across these interested parties is therefore crucial to bringing together these layers to deliver the world's most livable city at the local level. Thank you.